official. I changed the link from YouTube user blah blah blah. We are now officially Public Access America on YouTube.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. And I had some other good news. Jeffrey. This is pretty
Ooh,
exciting for everybody. And it is, oh,
you got some
where
playback.
am I? Yeah, I know that. Sorry. I hit the stream button and yeah. Sometimes YouTube mutes it automatically, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, hey everybody, welcome back yet again to another episode of Public Access America. We have our audio issues worked out now, I think. And so Jeffrey, we had some good news and I wanted to tell you about that. So we signed up for Red Circle
Hmm.
and it takes 100 subscribers so that you can generate videos. And
Hmm.
in 24 hours, we had that. I mean, that was easy for some
Hmm.
reason because we already had those everywhere. But it takes a certain number of listens averaging per week to get ad revenue. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
hey, there you go.
And we we were right under that, but we just hit our 30-day mark, and now our complete stats are in, and we blew that record out of the water. So we're going to be signing up for Red Circle ad revenue, which means we're going to be doing speaking ads for things that we agree with, and they want our addresses so that they can send us stuff and we can review it and tell people about
Oh, hey,
it.
fantastic. I'm always up for reviewing stuff. It's one of those things like there's so many things that I could use in my life, but it's
Mhm.
just, there's so much junk out there and you never know what you're going to end up getting and whether or not it's actually going to be worthwhile.
Yeah.
So, it's, I always appreciate it when someone actually has used something because I got buddies all the time that'll be like, "Yo, dude, I heard you were looking for X. You know,
Yeah.
I got this. I picked it up someplace, and dude, it's been awesome. Can't
Mm.
recommend it enough." Or, "Yo, dude, I heard you were in the market for this. Whatever you do, don't buy this."
Right. I mean, I learned about my body soap because I asked my girlfriend. I was like, "What do your friends use?" And they were like, "Harry's," and I was like, "Harry's, it is," you know. And so
Give it a shot. See what happens.
that's what I've been using forever. But if somebody tells me about a better one, then heck yeah, I love that stuff. That's what it's all about. And what I think is important is because I never wanted sponsors. I never wanted that commitment. I didn't want anybody ever telling me what I could or couldn't say. You know what I mean? And so I never could find a sponsor that matched this nonpartisan, neutral conversation, long form, understand
Right.
thing. And so I'm still not going to pick Sherry's Berries or something that doesn't represent this. But if somebody has a product that people use, because I have another thing for you that I know
Ooh.
you're gonna love. And someday we're gonna sit down and I'm gonna open the stat books for you so that
Ooh.
you can look at them yourself. But I checked out our Spotify stats because in July it'll be a year, and we
Mhm.
have 54% of our demographic is male, but 38% is female, and 3% is non-binary, and 3% doesn't identify. And I
Hey,
thought that was an
fantastic.
amazing stat, right? That shows how neutral we kind of are,
Right. And it's that's fantastic. I mean, our point of view is never to like try and single necessarily anybody out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we understand that there's always a thousand different viewpoints out there, and it's
Yeah,
just you got to have information to back those up.
right.
So the fact
That's
the
what I was
fact that
telling my friend. I'm antagonistic on purpose, you know?
right, right, because there are things out there that are it's important no matter where you are, who you are, and
Mm-hmm.
getting talking about some of these issues. You never know who's going to resonate with those issues. So
Right. And I also want people to say, what? Because like I was telling my friend, I don't believe in a border. And I bring that up to be in purposely antagonistic and kind of ignorant on the issue because I want people to tell me what they see the problems are with that,
hmm.
Not because then that starts the process of conversation about what to do with it. We almost don't remember why things are here, and we don't want to change. But if we
Mhm.
see how they got to where they are, then suddenly we realize it's changed throughout the years, and we're the only ones not willing to change it.
Well, that's fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, are you ready for some hot topics that aren't necessarily things that have gone on in the news?
Oh, heck yeah, because I didn't know what to do today. I wrote some stuff down and it got lengthy, and I was like, I don't even know if we're going to hit this topic list today.
All right. So I got something that is absolutely fantastic to talk about because
Yes.
this is one of those things that it crosses everybody. It doesn't depend on party, it doesn't depend on sex, gender, expression. It doesn't depend on anything other than whether or not you have money or you don't.
Mm.
And as we're all aware of, that gap is huge.
Yeah,
So,
it is the new division. And everything else aside, there's intersectionality to everything except that.
and here's where this gets fun is that when it comes to whether or not you want the government involved in keeping you afloat versus whether or not you should be able to pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. It doesn't matter. There are
Hmm.
mechanisms at work out there that I would say they work the way they were designed.
Hmm.
And the number of people who say that it's not intentional, well, or they try to explain away how this works, the reality is that the systems have an effect that either are intended or unintended, but nobody wants to fix that system in a transparent way.
That's
So,
right.
so let's talk about something that, I mean, you might have experience with. I certainly have experience with. My parents have had experience with. Something I know my kids are going to have an experience with, and that
Mm.
is what what is what is a credit score, and how does that determine how much more expensive your life is?
Yeah, why is there only three people reporting to it, and why do they have the ability to take things off, put things on, and change the details in it?
When you look at credit reporting and the way that it's designed to work, it's about figuring out where your risks lie in terms of who you lend money to. Now, one of the things that I know that we've talked about several times is that it is expensive to be poor,
Mm-hmm.
and that's as someone who grew up, dirt poor. I it's not a contest, but when you don't have money and you don't have food in the cupboard, it's one of those things where there are things that play out later in life, and it drives Debbie crazy. Our pantry is stocked with God knows whatever, and I don't know why I buy half the shit I do, but in my time spent looking through, you know myself and addressing some of the things that I've needed to, food insecurity was a big problem for me, like during like those first real cognitive formative years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and knowing a few other people that have had those issues, they do the same thing. It's like, I've intentionally like whittled down how much groceries I'm buying right now because we've got so much stuff between the deep freeze and the freezer and the fridge and the pantry. It's like we got to use
Yeah.
up some of this stuff, and then my lazy ass goes, I don't feel like doing it, and I
Mm.
go get something.
That was a major concern with people that grew up in the Depression, because I love
Hmm.
talking to seniors, and I would ask them, why do you always buy pork? Because I had the ground beef for years in the Depression and I don't want to eat it anymore.
Hmm.
So yeah, I can get
Or
the food insecurity thing. I love just looking at my pantry and going, I could go and order McDonald's, or I could just finally cook those egg noodles, you know?
right, or like my grandparents always had like a 5 gallon bucket of flour,
Right?
5 gallon bucket of sugar. And I never understood why until I sat down and I was talking with my grandparents who lived through the Depression. And they said, for a long time, you couldn't get those things. And, when you don't have much to eat, you'd be surprised how much, how much bread will do you.
Right.
And so just having simple things like bread and sugar, having animals that would lay eggs for you, having, your own source of vegetables. Like when the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic hit and suddenly, like, everybody, bought flour and decided that they were going to become Betty Crocker. It was just
Yeah.
absolutely incredible. Like,
Yeah.
you couldn't find flour for days. It was as bad, days, weeks. It
Yep.
was as bad as the toilet paper shortage. Like,
Yep.
everybody, you know, the the bread aisle was, I would say, the bread aisle was decimated for about a good 2 weeks solid. But
Yeah.
that came back. But man, everybody bought up flour hard,
And
myself included, because it was like, at that point, it's like there was no bread, there was some flour. I grabbed that. The toilet paper I had to stock up on. It was like, this is not going to be like the sharp death of the universe. What the fuck?
right. It's just tangentially, I don't want to get too far on it because you're on the credit score topic, but I think
Hmm.
right now there's a shortage in people willing to work these service frontline jobs, like because they don't feel they're getting paid enough. And I
Hmm.
think what the pandemic did was make them learn that they could live on nothing, like without a job and still survive. And so
Right.
why come back and spend those 16 hours making nothing when they could stay home with their families still, you know what I mean? And
Right.
so I think that's the struggle. And I don't think a lot of politicians are seeing the fact that we've learned how to live on nothing now, you know? And so it's a lot easier to turn down that job for $4 an hour. A Domino's driver gets paid $4 an hour when they're driving.
It honestly, it depends on the state, because
Mm-hmm.
certain states and the way that they have their laws regarding the service industry don't make any sense. Like, you can pay like, I think it was like Kansas or something like that. You could pay like $2.16 an hour,
Wow.
uh, and you were expected to survive off of tips. And so,
Mm-hmm.
that's just one of those things that's absolutely insane to me. Like,
Yeah.
you know, but credit scores and how you keep poor people poor.
Boom.
So this
Cool.
is where, so all of this, whether, even the whole, bread and flour thing,
Right.
coming out of the depression and out of the war, people were looking to expand, their their livelihoods. They were looking to expand, the luxuries that they had in their house. They were looking to be able to afford things that they didn't necessarily have. But when it came to credit, credit was, typically reserved for, the wealthy elite. So as all of these things as all of these things come out to play, you start to see these different mechanisms on how do you issue credit to people. So, for example, the big ones that we look at right now, in terms of credit worthiness, is number one, overall debt. I mean, overall debt's kind of important because, the question is what do you own of value?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I, my Chevy Malibu sitting in the driveway is not worth, you know, as much as it once was, but because of the vehicle shortage, it's worth more than it probably will be for a long time, or should be.
Sure.
But it's not a whole lot of value. I'm gonna bet like I could probably get 3 grand out of that thing,
Mm.
if I were to take it to a dealership right now. But that's not really a whole lot, considering it's a car that runs great, doesn't have any mechanical issues. Um, I would say the issues that it does have are cosmetic, some bumps and scratches. The seats are worn, but overall value wise, like, if someone were to say, okay, I will lend you money, but the collateral is your car,
Mm-hmm.
they're only going to give me 3 grand. Okay,
Right.
what else?
That's based
Well,
on a blue book value, right? Or a black
exactly.
book. Yeah.
Or, my education, for example, you know, you can't repossess my education. So,
Right.
that's a huge problem, because, what if I decided that I'm going to say fuck it all and live in the woods for the rest of my life and not contribute to society? Well, that's 100 and some thousand dollars that's just completely lost. That's not, they don't see that as very helpful.
Hmm.
But, um a home loan, obviously the bank would be able to take, the home and turn around and sell it for, well above and beyond what we get. And so, looking at all of that, looking at whatever you owe versus what you quote unquote own, whatever you have,
Mm-hmm.
basing how much credit you can give somebody on those amounts, like, strategically put, it's like someone like me who has now managed to work their way up a little bit. Still, we're not dead ass
Hmm.
broke, but we ain't exactly
Right.
rolling in it either.
Yeah, I got you.
But it's one of those things where when you look at other people and their livelihood and what they could afford, there are people out there that aren't going to have anything to their name. So, while that idea might be nice, hey, I don't have any debt. You probably don't have a credit card either.
Right, you're a
Or
ghost.
if they do have a credit card, they have very low limits on it
Hmm.
because that's as much risk as a credit card company is willing to take on them. And so that gets into the next piece, and this is the one that I find absolutely hilarious and absolutely frustrating. So you can have you can have your debt under control, right?
Mm.
You can have a credit card or two that have a good balance on them, and so balance is another important factor. How much of your credit are you using? So when you're poor, what do you use as a stopgap in order to keep the lights on, keep food in your pantry, get yourself to work? People end up using a credit card,
Mm.
you know and so now here's where the next piece comes in. Your credit score determines what kind of rates you're going to get.
Right.
So if you have good credit or or excellent credit, so you're looking at the 700 and above or 750 and above, respectively,
Mm.
the rate that you pay for the rate that your credit card accrues interest actually goes down.
Yep.
So as you use more of your balance, that changes your risk. So if you have 30% or less, they are like, okay, yeah, no, your rates can be lower. 30 to 50%, they're going to jack your rates up. 50 to 75%, going to jack your rates up. 75% and above, they're going to jack your rates up. All, as far as they can get them.
Hmm.
So then the question becomes, how do you try to get yourself back off of that debt limit when you have a company that keeps increasing the rate at which they charge on your balance?
It seems like a slippery slope, doesn't it?
It does. And that's the thing is that the question of risk is, where this really comes into play is that, I as a math person, it makes sense that the more balance you have, the less likely it is that you're going to pay it in full.
Hmm.
Because when you start to get yourself to a certain point in debt, that typically spirals. And so
You're just paying the debt. You're not paying
you're
the
you're not
principal.
you're just paying the interest. You're not paying the principal. But what it inadvertently does is it also creates this problem of what happens when you finally start to get footing. At what point do you actually get enough footing to where you can gain traction on it? And this is where the third piece comes in, and this one is the most important and the most frustrating,
Mm.
and that is age of credit. So this one I think is the one that needs the most work done on it. And you'll have bankers tell you, oh, well, we don't just look at, well, let me tell you something. Your credit reporting agency does, and they ding the hell out of you for it. So Debbie and I both just paid off a couple of old loans from going to school when we were kids.
Congratulations.
Right? It feels great. These are old debts that are finally gone, but
Hmm.
they are our oldest debts. So what they like to judge you on is what is your overall length, your overall average history of having credit.
Debt. Right. Oh, credit. I
Yeah.
just assume it's debt.
I mean, it is debt. For all of us, it's debt.
Credit is
But
debt. Credit is the French word for debt.
mm, so so you would think that as you're starting to dig yourself out of debt, that some of these old things that you pay off should be beneficial to you, right? Would make sense. You're paying off something. It's less. It's a smaller number overall to your overall debt history.
Hmm.
Fantastic. But guess what? Because those debts are well, I think probably about 15 years old for both of us, we're both going to take a hit on our credit score. Debbie already has. I'm just
Mm.
waiting for mine to hit. Why
Oh,
is that? Because our oldest loan, our oldest line of credit, is now gone. So your average age is now smaller. And when they look at your average age, it's like 0 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years, 15 to 25 years, 25 plus years. And so because that 15-year loan history is now gone, it has shrunk the age of credit and thus made your credit score lower.
right.
So in effect, we're getting punished for paying off debt. That means that credit card companies could take our credit card rates and raise them simply because we paid off debt.
Sure. Sure.
And this is where it's really frustrating, because if you think about the number of people out there that have had to take any number of loans in
Hmm.
order to either make ends meet or to get an education. I mean, for a lot of kids out there, a lot of people in my age group, we're going to have student loans until the day we die. But that has been one of the things that has made our credit history as good as it can be. But in an age where they're talking about this pending student loan bubble that's going to, do a bunch of damage to the economy, we're still finding ways to punish people for paying off their debt, which is where this we get into the topic of, what does it take to keep a poor person poor?
That's what
So,
that's America is based on that. It's like once you
mhm.
hit a certain level, you're gonna fall into debt, and it's just trying to find new ways to get us into debt.
I mean, if you look at what the American government is doing, it has been doing, this is not a new thing to Biden. It wasn't a new thing to Trump. It wasn't a new thing to Obama, but it
Hmm.
was a new thing with Bush, because under Clinton, we were actually running a budget surplus.
Right.
So when you look at from about 2000 onward, we have been spiraling into this crazy whirlwind of debt.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that shows, just how American it is to have debt, man, our government and most of us have really taken that one on the chin. We're we're
Yeah.
really we're really good at accumulating debt.
How can you say
But
we're the most richest country in the on the planet if we're just borrowing trillions of dollars?
well, the answer is simple. The US government is borrowing trillions of dollars, but it's not what most people think. We do owe other countries money. Like, we've borrowed
Right.
from China. I mean, that's just it. But most of our borrowing has come from leveraging our social security, which we've talked about that several times.
Hmm.
Basically, because the government has an endless source of capital that is constantly producing GDP, that's constantly producing tax revenue, they are constantly able to borrow against what was supposed to be uh, a security
Mm.
system in the event that all hell broke loose. Like
Right.
we've talked about before, Social Security was designed that should shit hit the fan, you have the means to provide a base level of living until someone can get back on their feet. When you look at where in the hell all of the support for COVID could have come from, the
Yeah.
answer is if Social Security hadn't been touched, you could have actually used Social Security to pay people to either a stay at home or
Hmm.
what have you.
Make it a UBI. Right.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what you could have done. But
I like
because it is
that.
so borrowed and leveraged against, it's
Hmm.
not something that our generation is ever going to be able to use. I doubt my kid, I have my concerns that my children's generation is going to be even able to look at it. They're going to have to pay Social Security tax, but the concerns that I have of them ever seeing a dime of it is severe, because we keep spending and we don't actually do anything about curtailing the
Right.
spending or raising revenue. And that's the reality, is that you got one side that just goes, oh, we got to raise taxes, and you got the other side that says, no, we got to cut taxes, we got
Hmm.
to get people back to work. The reality is that we're at a point in our debt nationally that every individual has had to make at some point personally. You either have to raise your revenue source, i.e., find a new job that
Mhm.
pays better, or B, and I would argue, you have to cut expenses. What am I paying that is not worth the money?
Right.
Unfortunately, though, it's just that for the American people, that expenditure cut is usually things and necessities that you absolutely need.
Mhm.
Medications tends to be one of the biggest things that people cut because they can't afford it.
Right. It's the
And so,
biggest one. It's the biggest one sometimes. So it's like the
yeah,
one that's in your face. And like, I pay my rent, I pay my electricity, I pay my cable and internet. Those are things that I automatically have to pay. But I've gone without eating for a couple days because I needed to pay that stuff.
right. And that's just it. Is that that's overwhelmingly the choice that individuals end up making.
Hmm.
The government does this great, wonderful political show where they shut everything down for a few weeks while they argue over budget. And that's always fun because in the end, it's not that the politicians get to skip out on getting paid. You know,
Right.
their quote unquote salary is guaranteed regardless, and on top of that, their political handlers or sponsors, whatever you want to call them,
Right.
donors, sure, we'll go with
Hmm.
that. Um, they're making sure that their politicians get paid because they need them to enact legislation that'll be beneficial to them. But your
Yeah.
average everyday person, who I may work for the government, or they work in an industry that leans heavily on the government paying them, like any
Hmm.
any sort of federal subcontractor, for example.
Right.
Suddenly you've got people that are having to make real decisions about where are they going to what are they going to do, because if I remember right, statistically speaking, I want to say it's about 2/3 of Americans live paycheck to paycheck.
Mm. Without
uh,
$400 in their accounts for an emergency, right?
exactly. So that's one of those things where it's like, where then, in times like that, do people turn in order to make sure that they're able to keep the lights on, keep food in the closet, keep
Right.
gas in their tank to get to work? They
Payday
turn to
loans.
credit, payday
Yeah.
loans. They
Oh,
turn to, and all of those things depend so heavily on your credit score and your credit history. And so these systems have figured out ways in which you can take a person's credit score and do certain things with it to make sure that people are paying the highest possible rate.
right.
And so
Ah,
when it comes to keeping people poor, you've got these large banking industries that have figured out ways that it's like, oh, well, let's see, how is it that we can make sure that, we're going to get our money back? And that's how they tailor it. That's how they
mm.
tailor the
Then
messages.
how do we justify it?
Yeah, they're not actually sitting down and saying, how do we ensure that people pay the highest rate possible so that way we can satisfy our investors? That's really what it boils down to,
Hmm.
because there are different institutions out there that are now taking this information and they're trying to turn it around so that way people can actually get weaned off of that living on credit cards or living on payday loans. Um, uh, so that's something that is encouraging out there, but I will say this, it's not your big bank, it's your credit union. Look at your local credit union, because a lot of them are starting to see this problem of their members are struggling to get by. And so,
Hmm.
mm, while they might provide payday loans, some do, some don't.
Right.
um, so they might have emergency personal loans, but they're starting to do things like actually analyze your spending history and say, hey, here's a potential place where you might be able to make some cuts. So that way your money goes a little bit further. They're actually providing financial education so that way people can start actually putting money in the bank. But even with credit unions, a lot of that information is still tied to those big three, your credit scores.
Hmm.
And where do you think the greatest manipulation comes from? Large banks. It's like, if you want to know why I don't like the large banks, it's because, they have three people that they have to satisfy, and one of them, first and foremost, they're investors. If they don't get their how many ever pennies per share increase like they expect, they'll
Hmm.
literally tank a business.
Yeah.
It's basically legalized gambling in a way that is high risk, and unfortunately for the people who participate in it, low reward.
Right. And honestly, it's always been manipulated, but now average people are beginning to start manipulated too. Activists and advocates are, you know.
Absolutely. You know, you've seen some shifts in how people would like to see it calculated. So like for
Hmm.
example, I believe it was FICO, where their focus is actually on time payment history, where they look at that. It's like, yeah, you can have a lot of debt, but if you're paying in full and you're paying on time and you show a significant history of it, the likelihood that that is going to change actually dips lower.
Right.
And that's an important thing, and it's a calculation on all of them. It's just not weighted the same amongst all of them. And that's where, why do we have three credit reporting unions and not just one or four? Well, someone's trying to be a fourth.
Mm.
And what it boils down to is that everybody's calculation is different in terms of what risk looks like. Because I mean, to play devil's advocate here, Jason, let's say that you've made 5 years of on-time payments, and then we had a pandemic that shut everything down.
Mm.
What do you think your payment history your looks like right now?
Mm. Pretty bad.
Yeah, so
Sketchy, spotty,
guess what's going to hammer you?
everything.
And especially in the current, with the big three, guess what's going to hammer a lot of people?
Mm.
Their ability to pay their debts on time.
Right.
That's going to be something that's really going to hurt a lot of people. And guess what that's going to do? That's going to raise their credit card. That's going to raise their lower their credit score, which is going to raise their credit card interest rates, which means that people who are already struggling to get by are now going to have extra expenses on their credit cards.
So another reason why Republicans wouldn't try and control a pandemic.
In the end, what it boils down to is that the systems are working as they were designed. They were
Yeah.
designed in order to ensure that they got the maximum amount of money,
Mm-hmm.
that banks got the maximum amount of money out of something as simple as your credit worthiness. And they
Right.
designed it in such a way that it wasn't about getting people off of having credit cards or having as little debt as possible. It was about making it as easy as possible to get and spend, but then punishing you for knocking down your debt.
It's a system. It's a cottage industry, right? Getting you into debt and then keeping you there and then trying to trick you that you could get out by getting into more. And that's America. Welcome to
And
America.
so you end up with a bunch, and that's where you get a bunch of
Oh,
these payoff industries coming out of places that will buy your credit card debt and then charge you a lower interest rate on it. And you're
right.
like, ooh, this is exciting, until you start to read the fine print on what that payoff actually looks like.
Yeah.
Because the some of those are just as predatory, if not more so. And you might think, oh cool, I get to, I'm gonna have 6 months where I can spend less money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the idea behind some of those payoff loans and payoff companies is that you put a substantial chunk of money down, so that way your payment gets back to what it was, but you're paying more on the principal of the loan.
Right, right.
But unfortunately, what ends up happening to the average person is they go, cool, now I can make just a lower minimum payment, and then that time period expires, and then you end up getting this balloon in your credit,
Oh,
your debt. And now, instead of paying less, you're actually paying more, and it's going to take you longer to get out of it.
that sucks.
But once again, think about primarily, though, now this is where it really sucks. And this is something that I actually got to study a little bit in my master's program. You know, when you think about what poor looks like, what do people think poor looks like?
A great question.
Well, statistically speaking, I can tell you what poor is, and it's people of color. More
I,
people of color are falling into that poverty line and below than white people do.
um, There's got to be a better way to put that, because percentage-wise, people of color are the minority, and if it's
Percentage
equal, then
wise,
there's more
if
more white people, so there would be more white people of poverty, but there
so
more of the
so it
percentage
depends
of
on,
black people, more of
it's
the
percentage
percentage,
wise. It's
right?
percentage wise. It's
That's for people
statistically
listening.
speaking. So I mean, if you go just by the count, yes, there's going to be quote unquote, there's going to be more white people that are poor.
Hmm.
But when you look at population percentage,
Right. Thank you. Population
population
percentage.
percentage, people of color are statistically more likely to fall under that poverty line.
Right. It's just my new thing is intersectionality, and I want to say
Hmm.
when you do something to just suppress like a region, an area, a district, a town,
Hmm.
there's still an intersectionality of people in that group. Like my where I live is majority colored, right?
Hmm.
A people of color. And I'm the minority. And so when Tallahassee suppresses black people, I fall into the intersectionality of also being oppressed.
Hmm.
But I'm not saying that I'm 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 taking on the struggle of colored people. That's not it. That's not it.
Right.
I'm disabled, and I know that everything is worse for them. And if it's me and them walking next to each other, they will get screwed much more than me.
Exactly. And so, this is one of those things that when we talk about the math of it, a lot of people are always going to jump to, oh well, the number of white people is higher. Well,
Hmm.
when you have a higher number of, when you have a greater number of people,
Yes.
you're statistically going to end up with a total that
Hmm.
is higher than another. But when you
Yes.
look at what the when you look at what the ratio is, what the
Yes.
percentage is, you'll find that it absolutely completely skews. It's like, for example,
Hmm.
the DOJ report on people who are jailed. Now, this is information that came out of Trump's own DOJ, and
Right.
what it showed was is that statistically, black men were more likely to be jailed than their white male counterparts at a statistically significant higher proportion.
Right.
And it was only as you start to hit about, I want to say 50, that it leveled out to where it would look closer to maybe a normal distribution.
Hmm. Okay. I just think if there's more white people in the country, but there's a majority of black people in our prison system, then yes, that's drastically disproportionate.
Yeah, I mean, it's drastically disproportionate in that regard, no matter how you look at it. But
Hmm.
now, when you come back to what does poverty look like, now we get into complex systems. So, what is very hard to do if you've got a criminal record?
Anything. Vote, get a job, get an apartment,
Get a loan.
be seen as a, yeah, get a loan, be seen as a real citizen. Yeah.
So, when you look at how complex these systems get really quickly,
Mm.
systems work like they're designed. And until people start actually breaking down these systems, until, number one, we stop arresting people of color for shit that you don't arrest white people for.
What are we doing with nonviolent drug offenses? Honestly.
Seriously. But that's just it. I can tell you the number of dudes that I know that got busted by the cops with a joint on them and
Hmm.
saw absolutely nothing, not even a fine.
That's me. Yep.
But God knows how many people of color. Well, I mean, we know what happened when there was supposedly a fake $20 bill involved. So that's where this just gets absolutely crazy is that looking at how these systems are built, number one, and then how they interact with each other, number two, tells you a lot about just how hard it is for poor people to get any sort of leverage and get out of a system in which they're very heavily dependent upon the ability to accrue debt and then hopefully pay it off. because unfortunately poor is poor, and when at a certain point in terms of credit history and credit score, it doesn't matter what you look like. When you fall below that 540 mark, it really doesn't matter what you look like. You're going to struggle with the highest rates, the lack of ability to get a loan, and you have to fundamentally look at these systems and start to tear them apart and change them.
Yeah, who's doing that?
That's a grand question. Um, and unfortunately, it's not something that's taking leaps and bounds, really. I believe that there have been some lawsuits that have come up and looked at, how people are being assessed credit or being assessed loans,
Mm-hmm.
and that's usually coming from a bank level, because I know that at one point, I want to say it was Wells Fargo. I think it was Wells Fargo. They got sued because they were looking at different zip codes, and they were they were assessing higher interest rates or higher credit risks to people in that zip code.
Like a
Well,
financial red line.
and guess what? Guess what the majority of the population was in those particular zip codes?
Colors.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so finding out how all of these systems interact with each other, if we're going to create true
Mm-hmm.
equity in the system, there are some things that fundamentally have to change. People shouldn't be punished for paying off their debt,
No, they
regardless of
shouldn't.
how old it is. Like, I'd be good with it staying neutral. It's like, you paid off some debt, that's awesome. Your credit score's not changing.
Right.
But the idea that, you pay off some debt and they give you like a, hey, congratulations, we know that's been on your record for a long time, and we're glad to see you making some headway, so now we're going to ding your credit score and drop you into a lower level, so
Because we
that way
still need
now
we
you.
still need to make money off of you.
Exactly. So when
Exactly.
so
It's an industry built on making money. That's the thing. Debt is, and there's no counterculture to that. That's what I mean. Like, you're
mhm,
right. This is my biggest question, and it has been for 20 years. How do I clean my credit up without falling into a scam that ruins my credit? It's easier just
absolutely.
to let the credit fall off than it is to actually try and defeat it. You know what I
and
mean?
th- and and I think that's where I think this is where, as someone who is always up for a good fuck the feds, fuck the system,
Hmm.
I think that it's time for people to come up with a new system that looks at this information and loans based off of new risks. The idea that someone paying off a loan creates a greater risk is absolutely
Hmm.
insane.
Exactly.
If I mean, what does that tell you? I mean, the loan that I paid off is roughly about $1,000 a year that I'm no longer having to spend at one particular place, that I'm
Hmm.
now free to either clear up other debt, or for some of you out there who happen to think more in terms of the economy, that's $1,000 more that I have to put into my local economy that will create jobs.
Yeah, but you're not giving it to the people that are making money off your debt.
Exactly.
They
So
they have to keep you neck deep in quicksand. And when you try and climb out a little, they're like, "There you go. Thanks for trying, but here's more sand."
exactly, and so that's where I see the need for either a great deal of pressure on these companies to change the fundamental design of how they calculate this stuff. I mean, I've heard this time and again from people who work in the banking industry. Oh, well, we look at all of these other things, but what?
But what? Give me
But
a loan.
that credit score is what locks you into a specific rate. It's like,
Hmm.
I think it's fantastic that you see that I pay it off and it makes you more willing to lend me money,
Right.
but that doesn't make you more willing to lend me money at a lower rate.
Yeah. And a
And
five and
that's
a
and that's the difference. The difference is they're willing to lend you money. They're not willing to lend you money at a lower rate because you've paid off debt. And
right.
that is just one of the secrets of keeping people poor.
Because a 500 credit score to somebody working on their credit, as opposed to somebody destroying their credit, is a 500 credit score. And
Period.
it lumps a good person in with somebody that's taking advantage of the system. And there is people that have used their child's credit to,
Mm-hmm.
they've destroyed it before the child was 5. There's
Yep.
people that have used their credit in ways because they'd rather have the bad credit and the current cash. There's scammers in every system, and now everything is just so scammy. We spend our lives trying to protect ourselves from the one scam that just happened to somebody else, as opposed to finding somewhere that isn't a scam to help us get through it.
Yeah.
I always thought the Consumer Protection Agency was that, and that alone is why I loved Elizabeth Warren, because I would go work for that. I would
Mm-hmm.
love to root out scams. These Medicare commercials that are like, you can get rides to the hospital and all this stuff. No, it's all based on one number, and you're just going to burn through that number faster and spend more. And that's the problem. And it's all these scams that are out there as
Mm-hmm.
legitimate. Nobody wants to call Medicare because there's the Medicare hotline. They offers more. You can't offer more than the company that is giving it to the people that are subsidiaries that are selling it. And there's so many scams, and credit is the big one. It's the big one, and I don't know how to get out of it, and I don't know who to turn to so that I can get it done.
Oh, I think somebody might say hi here real quick. Oh
Oh,
no, they're just turning on the lizard light. But there's
lizard,
Billy,
Billy.
and then there's Billy. Billy will always say hi. Come here, Billy. Hi, Billy.
Hi.
Hi, Billy. So this is so like I said, this is one of those things like these systems interact with each other in such a way. So when we talk about what systemic issues look like,
Mhm.
you know,
That's one.
that's one. That's just one, and it is one that affects people of color proportionately more than
Yes. Yeah.
non-people, white
Yeah.
people. And so that's one of those things where if you want to create equity within the system, like it shouldn't take an analysis like this to say, hey, this isn't fair. Why should people be punished for doing better,
Right.
for bettering themselves based on their past even, you know
Yeah. I don't want to be a jerk, but I just went through the pandemic paying my rent and utilities. That's got to count for something, right?
right. And so this is where, I think everybody needs to band together on this one, because if you want communities to do better, if you want communities to spend more within each other, then we have to stop being punished by these large systems that
Mm,
are designed to milk money out of the least of us, quote unquote.
right.
Because people, that people that have plenty of money, they're either A, they don't need loans, or B, if they get a loan, damn good and well that they're getting $1 million loan at a rate lower than you and I could get a $5,000 loan for.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that slightly fair based on the risk?
Based on the risk, it could be. That's where I'm saying it could be. Like, I don't expect, somebody who's making, $15 an hour to be able to get $1 million loan. I mean, but here again, you're looking at other factors like what kind of capital does that person have?
Mm-hmm.
You know, a person making $15 an hour probably does not have, $10 million in capital sitting
Right.
behind them. But a person who is paying off their debt and then getting dinged for
Right.
paying off their debt can't get a $5,000 loan or a $10,000 loan or a home loan at a cheaper rate to buy a house
So
because they're being
there's
punished.
there should be a more diverse look at threat, right?
Well,
Like
and a change in the
trying to
calculations.
instead of lumping Jason and Jeffrey in because they're white males of a certain age that have a certain consistency, and putting that with other people like me with a bad credit score, and I don't know, my neighbor of color, we're in a certain boat. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
maybe one's working on it and one isn't. I'm not. Maybe he is, and to put us in the same boat and charge us the same rates when there's an emergency, that kind of sucks. That kind
Absolutely.
of sucks. He's working hard to get out of it. I'm sitting here like a lump. The emergency happens and he has to pay the same thing as a guy that isn't even trying. That's not fair.
No, it's not. And those are things that, the weight and the calculations have to change. Payment history is important because,
Mm-hmm.
payment history is showing us that, hey, people are capable of paying on their debt, but it's not weighted as much as some of these other things are. And some agencies like FICO, they tried to weight more towards that payment history,
Right.
and it works out. It works nicely, but this is, everybody's got their every credit agency, every lending agency has their preferred use.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's using Experian or TransUnion, um, while that payment history is important, I mean, unfortunately, good payment history does not help you as much as bad payment history dings you. So proportionally, we'll just go with that.
Right.
Um, but also, still, like the idea that a person can pay off a loan and have their credit score get hit, that's something that has to fundamentally change. If you want people to get out of debt, but to be able to use credit in a way that's responsible, so that way you reduce the risk of losing your money, you have to change the calculations so that way people who are getting loans and
Mm-hmm.
are paying off their debts
Mm-hmm.
are not getting dinged so hard. Like,
Right.
these are people who could go on to open a business. These are people who could go on to buy homes. These are people who could easily invest in their community and keep that money circulating and generating opportunities for other members of the community who need it. But
Yeah.
because these systems are designed and built the way that they are, you aren't going to see that change.
No, and I think an important thing, an important byproduct of that conversation, if we're talking about the credit crushing down on people, is is the sand that's sucking them in, and that is a living wage. And if you want people to be able to get further in their credits, not only do you have to adjust that, but you have to give people money to pay these things. You know what I
and
mean?
thus and thus you see you have to increase revenues, but you also have to decrease the rate at
Yeah.
which you charge debt. Like,
Right.
these are things that they work in tandem. If you can get a net positive out of changing one, but if you want a greater
Mm-hmm.
magnitude of force, you have to work on both.
Yeah, there is people that scam the system because they want to see where the weak spots are. But then there's people that aren't really scamming the system. They're trying to survive through loopholes. You know what I mean? Like they're just
Absolutely.
waiting for the next advice on how to get out of it, and then they try that. And then, so that's all it is. We're just trying to survive or live under the radar or not report entirely. So
Hmm.
if somebody generates income and it's not legal, but it's they're surviving on it, who's losing out? You know what I mean?
Right. And so, you know this is one of those things. It's another one of those things that royally bothers me, and it's something that I hope that, maybe somebody out there hears this conversation today and goes, you know what, we're going to change this up. We're going to go
Yeah,
out there, we're going to look at this system, or we're going to create our own system,
yeah. Or
of
just
how.
offer solutions. I want to know the
Yeah.
solution because like I think you and I are a lot alike in where if you drop 200 pages of policy of the definition of how credit is maintained or judged or anything, we could make alterations to it and say, oh, I don't like this. Oh,
Hmm.
add this, change this. But we're just talking about the ether. We're talking about a system that doesn't seem to be in print or anything
Right.
definable. When you play a video game, you don't know the rules, you don't know the boundaries, and you're running wild. But eventually you learn the boundaries, like in Grand Theft Auto, and then you can game the system once you know where the boundaries are. I don't know the definitions of this thing called credit. Then I can't play the
Right.
game. I'm not expert in it, so I
and
can't play the game.
and most people who think that they're gaming the system, unfortunately, find themselves a victim of it.
Yeah.
You look at some of the simple things out there that you could get. For example, like, one of the greatest scams out there to me has been the advent of the rewards cards. It's like, oh, well, by spending money, you're accumulating all these points that you then use on airline fees. Okay,
Right.
you know what they don't tell you about that is the fact that those credit cards are generally charging a much higher percentage rate on them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you are better off quite legitimately finding a credit card that has the lowest possible rate and no perks.
Well, they're offering you 1.5% cash back, which is great if you're a business spending $500,000 a year and get a lower interest rate. But they're
And you're
not
able to
starting
pay
at,
that off in
yeah,
full every time you use it.
right. That's what American Express was, right? You can have
Hmm.
the credit, but you pay that back. Like you don't get to
Hmm.
roll over your credit.
Right. And unfortunately, everybody gets enticed by all of these different things like, oh, well, I get an X% discount if I shop at this store with using their
Yeah.
credit card. Well, the
Hmm.
reason you get that X% is because that credit card actually charges like 25%
Yeah.
on it. And realistically, people are going to carry a balance on it. So that 5% that you saved right then and there is going to actually turn into costing you about an extra 35 bucks.
Yeah, I've always believed just give me the cheapest price. I hate sales because the sale says, "Hey, we've been ripping you off and we're not going to for a week," you know?
Right. Or a sale says, "Hey, we don't like this thing that we're carrying, so we're going to mark the price down a whole bunch and tell you no returns."
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
that happen one time at a company I worked for where we marked a laptop on sale and people came in and bought it and we just said no returns on it.
Mm,
And I didn't know anything about why. I was just like, we probably are getting a new shipment of computers. And this laptop we were selling was straight junk. I
mm,
mean, out of the 17 that our store sold, 14 of them came back within
yeah,
2 weeks, completely worthless. They
that's
were
the other
just
side of it.
crap.
If it's on sale because nobody wants it and they're trying to find the base price that people will pay, you know?
Right. So it's one of those things where it's like,
And why, one more thing on that, why would you spend money to print a coupon to give me 30 cents off of something? Why wouldn't you just lower the cost 30 cents? I
So
hate
this one,
that.
so this one's interesting because, so in terms of mathematical marketing, something called JND, just noticeable difference. It's a marketing tactic that when they give you a certain percent off, it's
Mm-hmm.
just enough to make you go and to make you say in your head, that's actually worth spending money on.
It's exactly what it does to me.
So then the question is okay, what does a JND look like for various industries? Overall, it looks like about 10%. If you give someone a 10% discount on something, they're going to go, yes, that
Hmm.
looks like I should buy it. But here's the kicker is that what does that what does that 10% off actually look like? Well, that depends on what your markup is on the item.
Exactly.
So like some things where they're high volume and they're barely making a profit on them, like maybe a penny to 10 cents an item,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably not going to see any sort of sales on those things unless it's like they've got to get inventory out. And even then, most likely you're going to see the sale at just low enough to where they're still actually making profit on it.
There's like a change in regulation on how they have to produce it, and so they have to change or alter their, yeah, something like that. Then you'll see them dump the product or make
Right.
generic or stuff like that.
Right. But for larger ticket items where you've got markup of anywhere from
Mm-hmm.
25 to 75%, you
Cookies,
know
cereal, stuff like that. Yeah.
they're still making a bunch of money on it if they give you 10% off what they were going to charge you. What it
Yes.
does is it just allows them to move more volume of something. And so the way that some of these shipping systems have been designed is that they look at what your real inventory rate is, and if you're not moving it, it says, hey, you're about to get another shipment, lower the price on this now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
because
so
everybody has automatic reorder points, right?
exactly. So that's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you the consumer are probably going to save a little bit of money, but the
Mm-hmm.
idea that the idea that it's some magical point in which we're not going to be, the company's going to take an L on it. No.
Right.
There are very few points in which companies will take a loss on something, and it's because there might be something that they can get you in the door on and spend money on that is going along with that item. And so that's where you get the complementary good or supplementary good. So
And I
like
will.
for example, you
Mm.
know, you might go in and buy an Xbox from Walmart, for example. It doesn't matter if you buy an Xbox at Walmart, Target, Best Buy, Amazon, Microsoft. It's the same price regardless, but it's the complementary goods that go with it that you are going to spend money on. So, like
Mm-hmm.
if you buy a headset, for example, that headset is going to have a markup on it that is going to make the institution money.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah.
And so, even though they might not make any money on it whatsoever, the chances are that they're going to get you to buy something that goes along with it is going to make them money.
Mm-hmm. I mean, McDonald's takes a loss on its cheeseburger, but because they know you're going to get fries and a drink and pay the markup for that stuff.
Yep.
Anyway, thank you for listening to Public Access America. Tune in this Thursday for the follow-up, which Jeffrey and I are going to continue to do on our live streams at YouTube at Public Access America. And you can find our podcast like literally everywhere. But go to Spotify because those are my favorite stats right now.
Nice.
Anyway, so yeah, that's the other thing I have an issue with, and I use the example of Oreos, is
Mm-hmm.
Oreos cost, let's say, I don't even know, let's say $6, right? But they
Mm-hmm.
spend $50 million a year in ads. And everybody knows an Oreo. If you love Oreo, your family's going to pass that down. Your mom's going to eat Oreos. You're going to eat Oreos. Your kids are going to eat Oreos. You never have to run another ad again. And if
Mm-hmm.
you do have to run an ad, it can be literally a 5-second GIF of your product because everybody knows once they see an Oreo. You don't need these tricky campaigns to justify your media account, right? Because you're Oreo.
Right. And that's so that
So
that's
what
one
I'm
of the
saying
things
is,
about the name brand is like everybody knows the name brand and
yeah.
everybody assumes that name brand equals quality. And maybe at one point that was absolutely the truth.
Hmm.
Or maybe name brand means innovation. I will say one of the things about Oreo that the other games don't have right now is Oreo now has a gluten-free option.
That's awesome. But what I'm saying is they could lower the price
Hmm.
overall of Oreos and get rid of the ads that they're spent like you don't need these creative ads to sell your product. And but I do like the gluten free. I didn't know that. And they should run a
Yep.
commercial for that, a campaign for that, you know.
Right. And so like, you know, this is, it's to me it's the whole, how are you lobbying for,
Hmm.
people to spend money on you? And ads are one of those things like as someone who really doesn't watch TV and I pay for services to not have ads, you
Right,
know,
right.
like it doesn't, it's one of those things that it doesn't work for me. And I think that as you see more people cut from cable, you're going to see these ad spaces transform.
Mm,
How are you going to get people's attention? So like for example, what some people don't realize is that you might think that everything on your grocery shelf is organized in such a way that makes sense, right? Well, it does make sense if you understand how the structure of getting your product placed in a certain spot works.
right. The
So
spots
for
available when your product comes out and the room available and yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
not even that. Whose eyes are you trying to capture? So, like
Hmm.
for example, the most colorful cereal boxes and candies sit about at a child's eye height level.
Yeah,
So
but
that
they
way,
had
when
to they worked to get that spot is what I'm saying.
no,
Originally that
they
wasn't
had
their
to,
spot.
yeah, they had to work to get that spot until they figured out
Mhm.
they could pay to get that spot.
Exactly. But before them, potato chips had that spot. And then potato chips went down and cookies and candy came up and they had the money to buy that spot. Right.
And so, and that's what it boils down to is that when you look at how things are pushed out, it's that you know usually your deals are either going to be on the bottom shelf or they're going to be on the top shelf.
Mm,
That eye level spot is where people are going to just naturally reach, or kids are going to start complaining and begging, the parents to grab the really colorful box of sugar frosted sugar puffs.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
This episode is sponsored by Sugar
sugar.
Toasted Sugar Stuff.
This episode is sponsored by diabetes.
Yeah. In all of its forms. But yeah, I noticed because I bought Captain Crunch because I like my Captain Crunch. And the way it's designed was like free game. And in small print, if you buy 3 more boxes. And I was
Right.
like, yeah, but I'm blind. All I see is free game, or it's Captain Crunch is small, but the crunch is big, peanut butter is small, and
Right.
it's the way they
Like,
market it.
or my personal favorite is the when they put two products that are almost identical side by side, but there's a small change on one of them. You know,
Right.
but even like I mean, even only having strong vision in one eye, I'm still
Mm-hmm.
not the most observant person, and which ends up with probably the funniest screw up I've ever had.
I
So
got you
when I
beat.
was so when I was working for the law firm, um, one of the things, I mean, I was, it was right at the beginning of when I started. So I'm just getting the hang of working in a law firm.
Mm.
And we were out of coffee. Now, if you work for lawyers, you're going to know that lawyers need coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So I go, and they're like, "All right, so this is what we get. Go to Safeway, get the organics French roast. That's
Mm.
what the boss lady liked. I'll get what the boss lady likes."
Hell yeah.
So I get there, I see the organics French roast, and I'm like, okay, cool, boom, grab it. Sitting right next to each other, I just grab the one that I know that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
I get back to the office, and I'm like, all right, got new coffee. Boss lady's like, sweet. Goes to make a cup, and I hear, what the hell is this? And I go, oh no. And she's like, do you hate me? do you do
Oh.
you want to see us fail? And I'm like, what's going on here? And the entire law firm just bursts out in laughter because I accidentally bought decaffeinated.
Wow.
And so of course for the rest of my tenure there I was just getting shit about that. But it was funny until I bought the next box, and so then I sat them side by side, and even my boss went, "Oh, holy shit, I can see why you totally messed this up."
Mm-hmm.
Like there's just a little yellow bar just right off to the side that says decaf,
Right.
but the box looked exactly identical except for that one little spot.
Yeah, they do that with sugar-free a lot and coffee creamers, and
Yeah.
like the product is super small on International Delight. I don't know what the flavor is. I'm gonna tell you my secret, my blind story. I bought 2 creamers. One was Hershey's chocolate and the other was Fruity Pebbles. I mean,
Awesome.
because it was the color. I was like, whatever, that's a cool color. I'll grab that. Not even thinking. I never thought in my wildest dreams that International Delight would come up with Fruity Pebbles.
So the
Like,
question is was it any good?
it was horrible. Like
That's always the worst.
if you picked all the green Fruity Pebbles and put them in a bowl and then shoved them all in your mouth at once, that would be the flavor.
I just imagine that it's just like if you just like took a handful of fruity pebbles, shoved them in your mouth, and then threw the coffee down like that.
Yeah,
You
pretty
just
much.
straight go. So yeah, no, dude, I totally like that's. I mean, that's a hilarious fuck up.
Yeah.
But that's one of those things where it's like, I mean, I can as even though like I'm still technically able to see, like
Mm-hmm.
my ability to pick up on some small things becomes very difficult.
Because we're still men, and our attention
Oh
goes to
fuck.
shiny objects, not really the details within the
Well,
shiny object.
Well, and also too, it's like if it were like giant gold bar across the entire thing and it says decaffeinated, I would have been
Yeah.
like, oh nope, I don't want that one. I want this one. But it was just a little tiny little
And
spot,
it's
and
the
I was
one
like,
thing we need to know. Why wouldn't you? Like, cereal has a giant back panel that they just try and fill with crap. Why not put your nutritional ingredients there so that
because there's
people.
no nutritional ingredients.
Well, there's the other thing. Make your nutrition, especially if you're nutritional. If you're one of those brands like Kashi or something, make that
Mhm.
your whole back panel so blind people will start buying it.
That's always one of those, and that's just one of the toughest things is
Why would
like
they hide
finding.
decaf? Why do they hide decaf? You know what I mean?
Well, because most people don't want fucking decaf. It's
No,
like,
yeah, exactly. So you need to mark that.
well, but there again, like the question is was it designed intentionally to be misleading? So people be like, ah, fuck, I got decaf, and then they can't return it.
Oh, I got you.
So
Because
I can't.
they have to make decaf, but they just don't sell decaf, and the product gets old, so they have to balance it out somehow.
So the question is yeah, I can't speak to whether it was intentionally designed like that or not,
Mm.
but I can tell you that I totally fucked up and got the wrong thing because one little bitty little part I just was
Yeah,
not
yeah,
observant
yeah.
enough to notice. And then even then, after I did buy the right thing and I sat them side by side,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly people were like, "Oh shit, now I get why you totally screwed this up." It's
Because you're
not
not a
like it was
lawyer.
big and bold and like it wasn't big and bold and going, "This is decaf. Drink only if you hate yourself."
Because you're not a lawyer. You're not looking at those details. You should get another job.
Well, luckily I was never a lawyer, so but but still, that's one of those things where it's like with those small little fine details is
Hmm.
how do you actually get in there and make it so that way it's easier for people to see that. Now, I couldn't imagine like if you had to pick out between those two coffees whether or not you would have actually been able to get leaded or unleaded.
Yeah, and I probably would have like bought two bags to make sure I got one that was right, and I still wouldn't know. I could buy two decaf.
Oh God, and that's the other thing too is that sometimes when they run out of a product, they're just like they make it look like the shelf's full. And so
Right.
literally you've got two decaf sitting side by side. I actually had that one happen to me after I did the script, but I was like, all right, haha, you got me. The one on the left is decaf. And oh shit, that's decaf too. Wait, do they not have any?
Yeah. Right? It's all a marketing thing. Yeah.
So dude, it's like it's still funny to me, and every so often I still get shit, by everybody for buying decaf the one time when we were all exhausted from doing trial.
I do have a cereal hack. You want to hear my cereal hack?
Let's hear it.
I bought Raisin Bran, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
a good cereal for sugar, blood sugar levels, by the way.
Ah,
And
fantastic.
so I opened the box, took the bag out, flipped it upside down, and opened it. And I had a fully proportionate box of raisins.
Hey, fantastic.
They didn't all get stale because, cereal generally gets stale. And then when they're all at the bottom, then they all get hard and you gotta like,
Hmm.
I had fresh raisins. It was pretty amazing. So congratulations to Raisin Brain. Turn it upside down. Do that with all your cereals. That way, the dust kind of falls back to where it should be.
One of the things that I've really taken into is I like to get like the malto meal cereals, just straight up
Mm,
bag, no box. Fuck it, let's go.
yeah, I like
Like
that.
I wish that more places had better recycling because at one point here you could take those bags and recycle them, but while we were sending off all our recycling to China, we pissed off China and now they don't want our recycling. So now our
Yeah,
city has made it so that way it's trash, even though it's got all these markers that says, "Hey, recycle me."
yeah.
It's like
I've spent
son of
two
a
years.
bitch.
I've been spending 2 years separating my garbage and then putting it in the garbage can. Like, well, there's a a bag full of cardboard. Here's all my plastic. I don't know if they separate it anymore.
Right, and I think it just all depends on what your recycling program looks. It's so
Hmm.
highly dependent because like I know that some places are still actually collecting plastics and still sending it out. Our city isn't. It
Right.
goes into the trash now, and it's like that really sucks.
It does suck. You know what else sucks?
What else sucks?
Tucker Carlson sucks, dude. So
Like,
because I
whoo.
because I wanted to address it because I think part of it is I don't think we have a political lean, right? We last Thursday we talked about rationalizing Republicans and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And but Tucker said, I'm just going to get to it. He said 3,352 people apparently died after getting the COVID vaccine.
Hmm.
And I think it's an important thing to address, and I thought you could help me with that because
Hmm.
honestly, um it turns out that that means that they could have died in a car accident or choking on a ham bone or a heart attack or a stroke unrelated to the vaccine, but that they just got the vaccine and then died.
Hmm.
And I think he did that because he's intentionally doing it to mislead, you know?
Hmm. I wouldn't disagree with you on that.
And I don't know if you're a fan of what is it? It's VAERS, and that is the Federal Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. I
Hmm.
almost sent that, but I just found that about 11:30 today, and I threw it in because I heard that and I wanted to get past the misinformation, but I didn't really give you a chance that where you could go look at the data to say yes, that's what he's doing.
Um, so I guarantee you, most likely that is not the case what he's doing. But there's a broader topic in terms of what do these numbers actually look like. So, for
Right.
example, we have to acknowledge one thing is that there are people who have gotten the vaccine and then have died of COVID afterwards. What does
Hmm.
that actually mean? Okay,
Right.
so what that means is that they call these breakthrough events. These are cases of infection that have somehow managed to break through the protections that the immunity has. Now this is where it gets absolutely fun. The people that are claiming that, now this is all worthless because, well, people are getting vaccinated and still dying, I would like to remind them that these people, if they're dying from getting COVID while vaccinated, that also means that they would have died from COVID had they not gotten vaccinated.
Right.
So that's something that people need to keep in mind, number one. Number two, the rates of these breakthrough infections are significantly lower than just getting COVID in the wild without a vaccination.
For sure.
So you're seeing, mathematically speaking, reductions from 90 to, I believe Israel was reporting 97% reduction in cases of hospitalization. So the fact of the matter is that the vaccines are doing one of the important things that we actually need them to do, is keeping hospital beds open. The idea that vaccines are 100% effective has got to be the most asinine thing that I think we as a people have suddenly expected,
Right.
when all of the vaccines that we're given starting from childhood range anywhere from about 81 to 98% effective depending on the vaccine.
Yeah.
None of them are 100% effective, but all of them do some very significant things like prevent severe infections or hospitalizations. And these breakthrough cases, this is where there's just not enough data out there yet. From the looks of what they're seeing is that these breakthrough cases are variants. And so more than likely what's happening is that the protections that are offered are higher for, what they call the in the wild cases,
Mm.
but the variants are known to slip by a little bit more. I believe it was with Pfizer and Moderna. I want to say that they still were significantly effective against. I know for sure Pfizer, with the Indian COVID variant, it's still 88% effective.
Nice.
But with like the UK and the South African and the Brazilian variants, it's still anywhere from about, I think, 85 to 91% effective, just
You can
depending on the
you
variant.
can still get COVID with the
Hmm.
vaccine. It just limits how bad because your body's already prepared for it. So you
Exactly.
can you can still get it. It just reduces the severity of it. It's never meant to eliminate it, but one of the bright sides of it, the vaccine, is that it seems to do that. That it
Hmm.
seems to eliminate your risk of getting it in a large portion of people,
Well,
but not in everybody.
like they were saying, is that severe symptomatic COVID cases seem to be down about 97%, and
Yeah,
asymptomatic cases of COVID are down about 86%.
that's
So
cool.
those are things that are very important, but acknowledging that, number one, these things are not 100% effective. If they were, I would tell you somebody's lying to you straight up.
Mm-hmm.
because we don't have any vaccine that's 100% effective. Even like in the trials with teens where they're saying that the vaccine had a 100% of efficacy with Pfizer and Moderna, or with Pfizer 96% efficacy with Moderna, that 100% is it's the efficacy, and as we had Dan talk about,
Mm-hmm.
efficacy and effectiveness are two totally different measures. So
Clinical trial is 200 people, reality is millions. So that's the
exactly,
difference.
exactly. So so despite the number of vaccines that are out there, there are still going to be some breakthrough cases. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know if they are variants yet. There's just not enough data to support whether or not it's in the wild or variants.
But that's
Because
not what he's arguing. He's arguing that the vaccine killed 3,300 people.
and that's where we have to get into the next portion of this. Is I'm actually dealing with this right now, where
Mm-hmm.
I have an uncle that had a stroke about a week after getting
Yeah.
after getting his second shot.
How is Uncle Tom?
Uncle Tom's doing all right. He's
Hey.
I mean, he's going to be going through some life changes, and it's going to be it's definitely going to be. I feel for the family, and I wish them all the best, and I
Mm-hmm.
hope, I still do hope that my Uncle Tom has a chance at recovery. I mean, it's unfortunately it's going to be pretty unlikely, but you know what, if there was ever a chance out there, it's always possible.
Yeah.
Now when it comes to cases of, does the vaccine actually kill people?
Right.
Two things. Number one, there is very little data to support that within the United States. So we've had cases of blood clots with the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. That has
Mm-hmm.
absolutely happened. Now,
Right.
um, whether or not the vaccine is the cause of that, German scientists. There was an interesting article. German scientists think that they figured out why the J&J and AstraZeneca vaccines are causing these blood clots, and they think that the adenovirus that they use in order to transmit the information through the shot, they think that might be causing the creation of rogue proteins.
Well, so there is causality.
They think this is not reviewed. There's a possibility. So, but here was the other issue, and unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure what that data looks like entirely for Johnson and
Mm.
Johnson. But initially, the data showed that it was women primarily from 18 to about 35,
Right.
which we had talked about. That's also prime time in which women are on birth control, and birth control has a
Mm-hmm.
significantly higher rate of blood clotting.
Right.
So whether or not there's causality there, that's something else. Now, what most people don't think about is that because these vaccines are so new, there's a lot of effort going into researching them and finding out what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Right.
This is another one of those, there just isn't enough information and time to determine all of this yet. And we're
And
going to find out more.
And just
But
really quickly in that, before we go too far, what I was talking about, this vaccine, federal vaccine thing, it's an inroad for data. It's not an endpoint for data.
right,
So what it is it's like a real-time ticker of events. And so it's real easy to cherry pick and say, oh, this person got the vaccine, was in a car accident, died after getting vaccine. Yes. You know what I mean? But
right.
it's nobody uses it as an endpoint. It's not
It's a
it's just
collections.
it's what you're using, and that's what they used. This system, they used this to find those blood clots in
So
the Johnson and Johnson. So that's what it's used for. It's not used to come up with an analysis in and of itself.
so now this is where it gets fun, is because the question is are issues that are coming up because of the vaccine, or are they because of external factors?
Hmm.
um, Unfortunately, part of my family is not going to believe this when conversations have come up and said that my uncle was apparently they wanted to put him on cholesterol medication and blood thinners a year ago, is what
Hmm.
we've come to find out from one of my cousins. So he was having issues well before he got the shot, and was
Okay.
supposed to be on medications before he got the shot. So now here's where the grand question is if he had been on these medications and had talked with a doctor before getting the shot, is there a chance that they would have said, you might want to hold off on taking the shot because you might be at a significant risk of any sort of adverse health reaction? That's
Right.
entirely possible. This is one of those things where the system cannot determine whether or not people are unaware of their health or are aware of potential issues but neglecting it. So
Right.
this is one of those things like we can't necessarily determine initially who is aware and who isn't aware. It's just not a thing. And
Right.
so, unfortunately, in the case of my uncle, the likelihood that the vaccine caused his stroke it becomes mathematically, statistically unlikely
Right.
because he has all these other health issues leading up to this event. Now,
Right.
could it be that because he had all these other health issues going on untreated, and then he gets the shot and that just makes his body work overtime, does that lead to something tipping over the edge? Possibly. I mean, the
Possibly.
probability is the probability is there. It's not zero.
Right.
But the likelihood of it being the vaccine that was the sole cause of this
Mm-hmm.
is the probability is highly unlikely.
Right. But at
And
least we
that's
know that this data is going into a database.
right. And that there are going to be people that are going to be analyzing this information to determine whether or not, that's really, that's how the J&J blood clotting issue gets caught, is
Right.
because you have people who are healthy suddenly developing blood clots,
Right.
and there's no indications that what is happening in their life. Like there shouldn't be very many markers of an 18-year-old having a stroke or blood clot.
Right.
There
But you
shouldn't
wouldn't
be.
you wouldn't know that if the data wasn't collected and streamed and funneled
Exactly.
somewhere. And that's what this is. This is a funnel point. But it's,
Exactly.
and that's what you're using. So smart people like Jeffrey can actually go, hey, we had three blood clots. We should be on this. And that's
Exactly.
what's cool is that the system is working. But you gotta put those data points out there to be caught, you
and
know.
then and then this is where even though I'm somebody who has a genuine distrust of the government, there are certain things that as a data person you have to put your feelings about government aside, you have to put your feelings about politics aside, and you have to objectively look at numbers and what's going on. The reality is that these numbers don't care about party line. These issues don't care
Yes,
about whether or not you think the government is out to get you,
that's right.
because because in the end, these data points are going to help determine, is this an effective vaccination strategy to change
Hmm.
over into these mRNA vaccines? Unfortunately, I think what's going to happen is that, unless J&J improves upon their technology, J&J isn't going to be able to stand in and fight
Yeah.
the way that Pfizer and Moderna are going to be able to fight, because there have been fewer issues with those vaccines.
J&J has been had health code violations. They're trying to get factories in Baltimore up to date. It's
hmm
really a mess over there.
So so that's where like all of this data comes in, and you have to look at it objectively. And when you see cases like this where there's a stroke, you have to investigate whether or not there's any history there that would determine if somebody has health issues or not. So if you go in and you say, all right, we're going to look at this person who had a stroke, and you go, ooh, they weren't being treated for anything. They're not on any medications that would treat any of these symptoms. Now let's look at their hospital visit history. Let's look at their blood test history. Let's look at any number of data points that may have been collected to determine whether or not they've actually had any sort of health issues that could say that there is a factor here. And that's a reality with the J&J shots, is that the reason that they got paused was because there was a number of healthy people that weren't on anything medication wise that would be treating these people for blood clot issues. And so that in and of itself says, hey, there's likely an issue here where the vaccine is probably to blame. Unlike where, unfortunately, in the case of my Uncle Tom, you know, he was supposed to be on medication. He saw a doctor. He was supposed to be doing all of this follow up. And had he been on this medication, the delta in which they would have made the decision on whether or not he should be vaccinated would have changed,
Yeah.
probably. Like the
Right.
likelihood of, should I get vaccinated if I have all of these heart issues, they would have been like, we're going to have
Mm,
to use some extreme caution. We're going to have to make sure that, as far as being on your medication, that you're healthy and stable.
yeah. We haven't done the study on heart disease patients yet. You know what I mean?
So the real and then we also have to face the other reality too, is that there are going to be cases where someone has anaphylaxis and
Well,
they're
yeah.
going to die from the vaccine. That does happen. I mean, luckily the way that they've set this up is they've, wherever you're getting vaccinated, they have people there that are prepared to treat you
Mm-hmm.
and get you stable, so that way you can get to a hospital.
Right.
And and
Anaphylaxis isn't a death sentence. It's
no,
a condition that can be reversed pretty quickly.
yes, exactly. But, and for some people, there are going to be people out there that know that they can't get the vaccine because they will have anaphylaxis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly why we get vaccinated, is for the people who can't.
Right.
We There's plenty of cases out there, even in the vaccines that we know and we quote unquote trust, that we've taken since we were kids, and those vaccines are not available to other people
Right.
because of anaphylaxis issues.
Yep. It happens.
So so everything about being vaccinated, as we've talked about 1,000 times already, is a calculated risk.
Mm-hmm.
It just turns out that risk is a lot lower getting the vaccine than it is from rolling the dice and getting COVID and wondering whether or not you're going to die from it
Right.
or end up being intubated.
And so it's so interesting. There's two data points which I find interesting, and we've talked about this. I put my foot in my mouth about it once already, and it was six men in a cave that were tasked with cleaning up guano were some of the first to contract a form of the virus that was 95% similar to the COVID that is now going around. And then three people from a hospital setting, I don't know if it was a lab, you could call it a
Right.
lab, also contracted something similar. And I see this as a point where the guys in the cave would have gone to the hospital and somebody would have had to have gotten infected, so I see that as a transition where other people are saying fuck the guys in the cave, it was the lab people.
Vector is the word you're looking for.
Vector,
Vector.
right. And I just think I don't think it was lab born that way,
So
like I first
it's
originally put my foot in my mouth about. But the
right.
research that people are going crazy about, we need to look into this, and we
So
do.
and remember when we talked about this, where I said out of all the conspiracy theories, this is the one that is
Mm-hmm.
probably the most plausible.
Yeah,
And I've had to go back and explain this a few times to people because people have asked me about it, and I said it's
yeah, yeah.
still plausible.
It's on people's minds for
The
some
idea
reason.
that you can work in a lab setting and everything goes perfectly. Lab
Mhm.
accidents happen. Period.
Yeah,
End of story.
sure.
Mathematically speaking, when we look at the history of how people are getting these viruses,
Mm-hmm.
they're more likely have gotten it because they were bitten or they were eating things that are not food, or they ate something that had been exposed to. Mathematically, food tends to be food, or the animals themselves tend to be the vector.
You mean as humanity drastically increases and encroaches on natural society, the natural society fights back in ways like a COVID virus?
Or or the plague or whatever have
Yeah.
you.
I mean,
you
why
know
were those guys in a cave cleaning up guano if it wasn't because they were going somewhere where
well
bats resided, right?
guano is actually a very good fertilizer, so
Mm.
wouldn't surprise me you'd have people in a cave getting guano, because
But still
it is a highly sought after fertilizer.
encroaching on nature, and
Mhm.
nature has its own defenses, one of which might have been COVID, you know what I mean?
So the idea that, I mean, but that's just it, is that one of the things that I still tell people is that the lab theory is the only one that was ever based on any sort of potential reality,
Hmm.
because you can have accidents in labs do happen.
Yeah.
The question of how quickly things transmit after a lab accident, the question of who's going to report what after a lab accident, whether or not the whether or not if you report a lab accident you're going to get shot.
Mm. Right.
Less likely
Right.
in this country than in others, but um, in the end, when I say that it is plausible, I mean it is the only one that wasn't like, it's a weaponized thing. No, it's not. It doesn't have enough body
Right.
count in order to be weaponized. Well, it was born from 5G. No, it's not. That's not how radio waves
No,
work.
that isn't. And one thing is that these labs are built to find viruses and progress them. Like that's what they do to find their weaknesses and to find their potentials is put
Hmm.
them through their paces, their lifespan. So yes,
Hmm.
they wanted to mutate as many times as possible in a lab setting, as opposed to what Corona did, which was do that same thing out in the public.
Right. And so, but still, I think that when they finally do, because Biden has ordered that there's a full intelligence research on the lab setting,
Mhm.
based on some of the information that's coming out there, what the World Health Organization said was is that there were dozens of variants of coronavirus running around China
Mm.
before by December,
Right, right, right.
and that there's a potential of some people being hospitalized from COVID like symptoms in like November.
That's
And
what
if
makes it COVID-19 and not COVID-20.
exactly, but the idea that there would be dozens of variants running around China by December, if the idea is that it came from a lab, you would have had to, the idea that you would have that many variants within a short period of time is mathematically a lot less likely, which
Yeah.
means that the exposure would have had to have happened earlier. So most likely you're looking potentially anywhere from, back to July of 2019 where the first exposures potentially start.
Okay, maybe I don't. I just think a weakened baby virus could have bounced around and died off and mutated, and they just didn't notice it.
I mean,
It
and
was
that's just it.
flu-like.
That's just it. Is that it's hard to say because
Hmm.
unless you have a bunch of samples from people being sick with these symptoms and can
Right.
go back and test. I mean, the only thing that we're going to be able to do is try to operate under the idea that certain groups of people that had certain symptoms were probably carriers of COVID, and that's going to tell us whether or not, quote unquote, it came from a lab or came from the wild. And so like I said, this is where it's like mathematically speaking, the probability of it having derived in the wild
Mm.
and getting some sort of exposure either by people encroaching on, bat territory or their
Yeah.
sales as food in wet markets are far more likely, mathematically speaking, because we've seen this with several other viruses that happen. Ebola is another great example. Ebola outbreaks happen because people start eating bats. We know that vector. SARS, the original one, happened because bats had been eating or had gotten into contact with some type of bird, and
Mm.
those birds were being sold on the wet market. And
Right.
so then that ends up, with that SARS outbreak in 2002. MRSA is another one,
Mm.
where that's animal derived. The idea that
Hey, guess what?
what?
SARS, MRSA, COVID, same thing.
Hmm.
They're all the
They're all,
same virus. I mean,
they're all
they're all
coronaviruses.
they're all coronaviruses.
Yeah. So the idea that, it takes a lab leak for something like this to happen is
Hmm.
statistically unlikely,
Right.
especially when we have far more proof that diseases born this way are actually natural pathogens that happen.
Right. Exactly. An old lady has aches in her bones and she's 84. She doesn't know it's a virus. She just thinks it's her age. And so she just doesn't know and passes it on. It happens. It happens all the time. It's happened throughout centuries, Black
Hmm.
Plague, everything. It's all from our,
Absolutely.
our lack of understanding of science. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's just it is that it, it's our contact with the wild. It's
Mhm.
the idea that, oh well, this should be safe, this should be fine, I don't need to take any precautions. Yet, how many of our parents told us, when there was a dead bird on the ground, don't touch it.
Me, right? Definitely don't touch it. That
you
I hate animals because of what they carry. I'm not scared of a raccoon, motherfucker. I'll hit you with a shovel, but all those fleas that have been sucking your blood, jumping on me, I don't want that.
I mean, there's still on average 10 cases of Black Death plague in the United States every year because
Wow.
prairie dogs carry the plague. It's just that, after 1,000 years,
Hmm.
the plague isn't lethal to us anymore and can be treated by simple antibiotics, it turns out.
Right, because the majority of the population isn't hunting and eating prairie dogs anymore.
Right. And our shipping systems are a lot different. Our health systems, our sanitary systems are a lot different. A
Yeah,
lot of things changed, but there are certain things that haven't, and that's how quickly things can be transmissible.
sorry. I'm on this idea now of just making prairie dog burgers and selling them to Trump supporters and say, don't believe the science, you won't get the plague.
Listen, you have any idea how many prairie dogs you would have to shoot in order to make a burger?
No idea.
Oh God.
Hmm.
Debbie's gagging over here at the idea of having prairie dog burgers. I don't blame them. I don't blame them one bit.
Yeah, that's
Hell
rough.
no, I would. That is no, no. That's like back in Montana we have mourning dove hunting season, and I'm like, do you have any idea how many mourning doves you would have to shoot in order to make a dinner? Well, the daily
Yeah.
limit is 8, and each breast is like a fucking chicken nugget. So no wonder the daily
Wow.
limit's 8, because you have to shoot 8 of the damn things in order to have one meal.
Wow.
It's like, so prairie dogs, no,
Prairie
no
dogs.
prairie dog burgers.
Okay. Okay.
You turn them
Can
into
we
hot
also
dogs.
can we
Hot,
also say
hot prairie dogs. Wait, no, that sounds bad.
can we get rid of that commercial for wet teddy bears too? Because I that grosses
Wet,
me out.
wet teddy bears? What the fuck?
Have you not seen the Liberty Mutual wet teddy bears commercial? Oh.
I have not, and that just
Oh, you don't
sounds.
get to see commercials. See, I'm stuck because I can't
Thank God.
see when the show comes back, so I can't fast forward through them. And there is some horrible commercials out there.
Oh, dude, there's some fucking horrid commercials out there, and I don't know.
But they won't ever be in our shows, by the way.
Um, Listen, we're gonna have a talk if we have a wet teddy bear.
Right. So really quickly, I did have a note here, but it takes a century. Like, there's a lot to it, all right? So
Let's see what we got.
I don't know. It's the filibuster, right?
Oh, the filibuster.
The filibuster. And
Uh,
I just want to say there's some history to the filibuster, but what really struck me as a number that I thought we could concern ourselves with
hmm
was the fact that I'm trying to find it in this giant note. I tried doing the history of it, right? No.
hmm
And all right, it's been used 2000 filibusters have been used since 1917,
hmm
and about half of those have been used in the last 12 years, but there is 161 exemptions to the filibuster.
hmm
One of those is reconciliation, the other is in regards to military base closings, stuff like that. And
hmm
so it's not like it's this precious thing, this precious artifact that the Senate has that they're stuck with. And in fact, in 1969, it was only spoken filibusters, but in the early 1970s, the silent filibuster came about. And as long as 41 senators threatened a filibuster, it could block something.
Right.
And but I mean, since then, 161 exemptions have come up, and I don't understand why we can't put voting rights in one of those exemptions. Both parties have done it. So it's
Mhm.
non-political, it's nonpartisan, it's a tool that's being misused, but if we're going to misuse it, can we categorize voting rights in it? You know?
So this is one of those fun ones. Having done parliamentary procedure,
Mm.
you don't have the filibuster in parliamentary procedure. What we have is what we call a limiting vote, and so
Mhm.
basically, it's recognized that whatever you're voting on is going to limit the rights of the members. And so
Right.
that means that you have to get a certain threshold of votes in order for something to pass.
Yes.
So In which case, you know what? If you're going to set this up as something that limits the rights of the members, then absolutely, you should have to hit a threshold. But if your only threshold is that you want to talk on it till it dies,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, that's not that's not limiting the members of right, limiting the members' rights. That's
What
just being an asshole.
filibuster is what ends debate and starts the vote.
Hmm.
Just so we know where it fits in. Like they're allowed to debate a bill all they want,
Yep.
which they don't do anymore. They just start with filibuster to end the debate when they don't. And I don't like the silent thing. You know what I mean? I
Which
think they should
that's
have to stand there and filibuster, and then when they're done, vote. You have a chance to make your case. If you're that passionate about it, stand there for 24 hours and tell us why. But
mhm.
don't sit there and read green eggs and ham, you know?
Exactly. And the filibuster is just bullshit. I don't think that it has any place in modern politics.
Right.
What you need to do is you need to decide whether or not, a bill is going to limit the rights of members.
Hmm. Right.
Because that is a very real issue, and if it's going to limit the rights of members, then yes, you have to hit a certain threshold. Now, in parliamentary procedure, we have what we call a supermajority vote, which
Right.
can be 67% or 75%. It just depends on how you want to set it up.
It was 75% originally, but then in 1917, they knocked it down to 60 members.
Right. So in which case it's like, you know you need to set it up as a limiting the rights of the members, and if that's all it is, and if it's not going to pass because it can't get 60 votes, then so be it. That is perfectly acceptable to me. But the idea that you can talk on something until it effectively kills it, that's just bullshit. that's
It
that's
is,
not
yeah.
that's not actually contributing to constructive debate. In parliamentary procedure, we have a lot of ways to send things back for reconsideration. We have a lot of ways to
Hmm.
send things back to be reanalyzed, redebated, and kill things in other ways
Yeah,
if you can get enough votes. The idea
sure.
that talking it to death is acceptable, basically what you're relying on then is you're relying on a couple of people to be able to just completely destroy something that they don't like. I mean, look at what happened with the civil rights discussions, where Strom Thurmond sat there for 24 hours straight trying to kill the civil rights bills.
Right. But how did it do that? Wouldn't when he's done just mean now we're voting? Like, how does it kill it? If you talk for a month, when you're done, that just begins the voting process finally.
Yep. Yep. And so basically what it boils down to is that you have to have enough people there that are going to do their job. And what you saw was what you had 54 vote in favor, 35 vote against, and then a whole slew of them that just were like, fuck it, I'm not showing up.
Right. And still getting paid $2,000 an hour to not vote on something as critical as that.
Right. So to me, it's one of those things where you can get rid of the filibuster, but still provide mechanisms in which something can't pass unless it reaches a certain threshold. It's
Okay.
something that they do all the time, anyways. So why not just memorialize it in a voting fashion?
Okay.
And that way you have to recognize whether or not it's going to limit the rights of members.
Okay. So what would you say to Joe Manchin and Kristen Cinema, who are just dead set on not getting rid of it?
Um, I would say that I wouldn't necessarily call them Democrat in name only. I would say that they are enjoying the spotlight attention of being able to fuck things up. And that was something that McCain was frequently known for doing for on the right, where
Right.
they were so close to having the skinny repeal of the ACA, and McCain just saunters in and gives the famous thumbs down that left McConnell standing there with his mouth hanging open,
Yeah, right.
and just fucking walks out. So you know it's one of those things, like with Mansion and Cinema. It's like like that's up to their base.
Right.
And if these people are not the representation you want, then it's your duty to vote them out regardless of how long they've been in there,
Yeah.
because that's the way that our system should work. Is that even if they are the political party that you want,
Hmm.
and if they are not doing the job that you expect, then it is incumbent upon you to get rid of them.
That's right. That's the cleaning process. We're bringing
And
in
so,
representatives and getting rid of politicians because politics isn't governing. It isn't legislation. It's trying to get reelected. And
yeah.
we need to realize that bureaucracy sucks. Government is always going to be there, but politics doesn't have to be a part of it.
And so for the people who are going to be voting on Manchin and Cinema, whoever challenges them needs to sit down and lay it out that, they don't think that the filibuster needs to be kept around, and that, this is why they need to be voted in.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
I, as much as I despise it, and as much as I would say, hey, this is a problem and it's going to be a problem for you, because just remember, just because you want to be able to use something doesn't mean that it isn't going to get used against you. And if you
I
don't want it
agree.
used against you, then you shouldn't be willing to use it against somebody else. Period. End
Well,
of story.
here it is. What I'm saying is that it's been changed or altered since its inception so many times. How can you say that it is what it originally was? So why keep something? Why keep it when you don't need to, when it isn't what it was? You know what I mean? It's morphed into something else that should be readdressed.
Exactly. And like I said, this is where we need to readdress what does it mean in
Hmm.
order for something to be voted on. Do you have to say that it limits the rights of the members? So, for example, one of the things that we say is that, when we are going to cap debate on something, we say that it limits the rights of the members,
Right.
because you have a right to sit there and speak on something. You can set time limits, you can set number of turns you can talk on something. But if you're going to limit it in such a way that not everybody gets to talk, if you're going to limit it in such a way that um, you have to hold a vote by a certain time, then you can say that it limits the rights of the members, and thus being able to pass it is going to require a 60% vote, you know
Sure.
things like that.
And you can
There's
also say that a minority, like senators that represent a minority can still control the majority through this. You know what I
uh-huh,
mean? Which I find
absolutely.
troubling. California only has two senators. North Dakota only has two senators, but North and South Dakota, with less people, can control more than California if they stick together.
But see, that's where we have to have a fundamental understanding of what a democratic republic looks like. The two
Mm.
votes, that's the republic part of the democratic republic.
Right.
So where you
You're right.
get
You're
more
right.
say is in the House, because there are more people in California than in North Dakota or South Dakota, and so
Right.
they're represented differently. So the senators are literally what the state wants.
Hmm.
The House of Reps is what the people want.
Right. Because government is a contract between the people and a government.
So I've seen that one crop up way too many times, and I've got to put a kibosh on that one. Like well, California only gets two senators, and
Hmm.
and and North Dakota gets two senators. Yeah, that's because that's the republic part of our democratic republic. That's why you have some states, some countries that are republics. It's like you get two people from a region and that's it. You have some
Right.
places that are direct democracies, and so
Right.
literally bypass all of that.
Like England, they have a House of Parliament. You just need the majority of everybody to get there, like
Right.
Israel.
And so like with ours being bicameral, it's like you have the people and then you
Mm,
have the states representation, and so that's how our system works.
okay. I don't like it,
So
but it works.
it's but that's just it, is that if you're going to say that the states have any sort of powers or rights, then you have to have some way of the state being able to represent itself, even though it's the
Right.
population of the state that determines the elections and whatnot.
I guess it's like the little boys and the big boys. I think they think senators are like their parents, and the House is asking for permission, and the Senate just kind of grants it as they wish.
Yep.
Yep.
So That's just one of those things. It's, whether or not you agree with it, that's how a democratic republic works.
I
you
love
know.
it. I love it.
So,
So what's your favorite Princess Bride movie?
the Princess Bride, the
Me
Princess
too.
Bride.
Me too. I
Uh,
love that movie.
yeah, the idea that they're going to do a remake of it, or
No,
reboot
no,
or whatever, or a sequel to it is just no.
no, don't do
It's
that.
just don't do that. It's the reason why it is what it is because it was magical. And if you come in there trying to do something different with it, it's some. There are very few cases where you actually get something that's going to be as good as the original, and especially after so long.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. I had no idea they were gonna do an original
So
or
I don't
a
know.
remake.
I
Sorry,
don't know what it. I've heard that it's a remake, a reboot. I've heard that it's a sequel. I've heard so many
Oh,
things about it, and the answer is don't. Just don't.
don't. Just don't do it.
Just
Okay.
don't. Just
So
don't.
I want to shout out what is it? I've been trying to figure out this word, Foozled It, the comedy podcast, and they're on Twitter at Foozled It, and they've been reposting and retweeting a lot of our podcast tweets, and I want to appreciate them. So thank you.
Awesome.
All of them, they're in our notes. And I found this Loner podcast, and it is at Loner Podcast One. And I shouted her out, and she thanked us and shouted us out, and we shouted her out. And now we're friends on Facebook, liking each other's stuff. So, hey, the Loner Podcast is
What's
awfully,
up?
awfully great. Because, podcasting isn't really censored, Jeffrey. And that's
No.
why I think we have a role because media does what the sponsors tell them to do and what executives think is best for their bottom line, but we don't have a bottom line. So
No.
I
We
think it's
have, we really haven't
important,
had a line.
like I don't really care. I can go against Rupert Murdoch as he owns CNN or as he owns Fox.
Right. Right.
But thank you for being here. Is there anything you wanted to end with? Hi, Devi.
I think it's nap time.
Yeah, I think so too. I
I've
don't know
just
if you
got
could hear
I've
my
just got
friend on the couch.
I've just got Billy over here just chilling
Oh,
and needing some love.
I love it. Well, go love your dogs. Everybody should go love their dogs.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
I'll end by telling you this. There's a tweet that's super popular on our Twitter about rescued dogs from South Korea. They were in the dinner market. They were plans to be eaten, but we rescued them and brought them back to America, and now these dogs are available for adoption.
Hey, go get yourself a good adopted pet.
It's wet market. You never know. You might get the next COVID dog.
Oh, Billy's like, no, don't say that. I don't.
No,
No COVID dog. I'm
no,
the
no
good
COVID.
dog. I am the good girl.
Yes.
See,
All right.
see.
Love you. Go take a
Oh,
nap.
alrighty.
Bye.